A little bit.
Good evening, Ken.
Good evening, Ken.
Good evening, Ken. Sorry.
Technical difficulties. We can hear you. I can hear you fine.
I can hear you too. Okay. Well,
Hey. Okay. Oh.
So you want me to just start on the jokes, and if we get them, we get them. If they don't get them, they don't get them. Okay. So we're going to start one called Big Mama, and this joke, the child says, you know, one set of grandparents were known as Big Daddy and Big Mama, and then one day when my child was having a baby, Big Mama put her foot down. She said, we're getting rid of this nickname now. I refuse to be called Great Big Mama. Great Mama, Great Big Mama. Okay. Stan has a Thanksgiving joke for us.
Oh, okay. So mine is, since it's Thanksgiving coming up, is and I heard this week, is what did the turkey say to the turkey hunter?
What?
Quack, 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 quack.
Here's one of those thought-provoking jokes. You know, for years, the evolutionists said, you know, life can come from random. If we can get 1,000,000 monkeys typing on 1,000,000 typewriters, they would create something beautiful and complex like all the works of William Shakespeare. Well, now we know that's not true. How do we know it's not true? Thanks to the internet. You can kind of see how that works itself out, right? Now, these are called brain teasers. They're called brain teasers. A murderer in a third world country is condemned, but they're going to give him the opportunity to choose his method of execution. So he's given 3 choices. They can throw him in a pit of fire, or they can throw him in a room with a bunch of armed assassins, see how long he can survive, or they can throw him in a room full of lions that haven't eaten in 3 months. What is his best choice? His best choice is number 3, because the lions are all dead. They starved to death.
That's funny.
Okay. Now, just a little bit more. Think of yourself in Star Trek. Captain, I can't believe my ears, Mr. Spock. Yeah. This next one, I don't even know if I understand it, but I'll tell it to you. The guy says, if you're on an Eagle trip, at least you should be smart enough to bring your luggage. I guess he's so unprepared. But anyway. Well, how are we doing at this point? Are we ready to go on the air? Oh,
Everybody hang on for a minute. We're going to
I can hear you though, Ken.
I can too.
Okay. Okay. So we'll
We'll
work
go ahead.
around you, Ken, until you're ready. Appreciate Thanksgiving Day and avoid the spiritual cancer of unthankfulness or ingratitude. And what we are proposing is it's like a spiritual law. If you're thankful, you're happy and you're blessed. You know that song, if you something and you know it, clap your hands.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's kind of, well, if you're thankful and you know it, you are blessed with similar things. And then if you have ingratitude and you're unthankful, you will not be happy and you will not be blessed. Kind of the converse of the first half of that.
Yes.
And this is what works. Decadence comes with being ingratitude and unthankful. Decadence, like a law. If you're unthankful and spoiled, you're going to be more decadent and weaker. Okay, to prove that, I'm going to read.
Yeah. All right, let me see if I can close that, fix that.
We, we're always looking for things that bring us joy and happiness. And this is one of the things that we neglect to see and to bring to the fore is the fact of being thankful. And God's word actually talks about, like you said, Dr. Rick said, it actually brings joy to you to be thankful in your life for the things that God has given you. It's like when you get up in the morning and you can go to work grouchy and angry at the world, but sometimes you can look out and just look at a sunrise coming up and it can change your whole disposition, when you're thankful for the sunrise and the beautiful weather and your health or whatever it might be, the moon at night or the gentle rain, all of those wonderful things that God gives us. If you give thanks for them, it changes your introspection, I guess, about life as well and sort of dissolves away some of the problems you might have.
Some days we walk out the door and we see this beautiful Missouri blue sky, big sky. You see it and you think, it's gorgeous. And the opposite of that is when you aren't thankful, you open yourself up to decadence and unthankful things. I'm going to read 2 Timothy 3, 1-3, but you all can look it up in your own Bible, 2 Timothy 3, 1-3. And I edit these a little bit so they're not quite so long, but the whole scripture's there. And Paul says, but know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents. And then I put in all bold, unthankful, without self-control. And can you see that as we get close to the end, as if people become more and more like that, they'll be more decadent and unhappy.
Yes.
What's amazing is notice how he includes unthankful in with all of these other elements that are associated with perilous times. You wouldn't think that unthankful would make the list, but it's included with all of these other aspects or characteristics, of human behavior that is obviously going to be there in the last days, in the time in which we live. And you just wonder, do you think that unthankfulness, somehow people that are unthankful, they assume that they deserve the things that they're getting instead of being thankful for them? It's a general attitude is what it is.
And to add another scripture to that one, it's like if you're not grateful, it fuels your decline, opens you to bad influences. Paul says in Romans 1:21, he talks about that. I'm going to read it.
I got
Unless
it.
Ken wants to do it.
We're back.
Romans 1:21.
Yep, I got it.
Okay.
Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened.
And if you read the next 7 or 8 verses, they go into terrible degeneracy, decay, and sinfulness. But like one of the opening doors to that decadence was being, I'm trying to think of a good word for it, ingratitude, unthankfulness.
One of the striking points of that verse there is that he says, because although they knew God, it's like they knew God was there, but they just came to the point where they rejected him and just totally gave up every attitude, every quality, or every allegiance, that I should say, that they had to God, and became ungrateful. And it really, it says they became futile, but at the end of that, it says their foolish heart was darkened. So what the actions that they were committing were foolish acts, where they were gambling with God and their relationship to him with all of these other things. And as a result, they lost that relationship with God because of their foolish actions. And the biggest part of that, one of the big things in that, was they were just ungrateful to him for the things that he had done for them.
They went off the deep end.
Well, we see that in our society today. People are completely unhappy with their situation, and they want to blame other people for the situation they're in, instead of being thankful for the things that they do have.
Yeah, it's I'd almost say that sometimes you don't appreciate what you have until you lose it. But no matter what your situation is, it could be worse, and you have blessings you maybe just haven't focused on them. And by the way, the Apostle Paul emphasized the value of thankfulness in a number of his epistles, so his churches he started. I just kind of mention one of them, Ephesians 5:18 and 19.
All right. Filled with the Spirit, in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord, giving thanks always for all things to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, thankfulness is like a powerful spiritual force to buoy up our spirits. Like the very act of thanking God helps draw us closer to him. And ingratitude, the converse, pulls us away from him. By the way, all of this is leading to Thanksgiving and some things you're going to say about Thanksgiving. You probably already, the audience probably guessed that already.
You gotta, when you read the Psalms, you gotta think that David had this thankfulness in his heart all the time for God, because you cannot read the Psalms without realizing he was very grateful to God for everything that he did, and he expressed it in so many ways. I think too that when you are grateful for something, it reverses the spotlight off of yourself onto something else. We're always wanting things. We can be grateful for our house and our car and our clothing, our family, friends, but we also can be thankful for the spiritual blessings that God give us as well. And I just think when you begin, your mind changes gears and goes a different direction. When you begin thanking God for the things you have, you start forgetting about the things that you think you need.
That's a good point. That's an absolute good point.
Yeah, it's a lack of thankfulness is not good for you. Let's go again to what Paul says. Philippians 4:6, please, Ken.
We're not in Ephesians?
Philippians 4:6. Did I say Philippians 4:6?
You did. We must have, maybe I messed up. All right, here we go. Let's see. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, and with thanksgiving, let your request be made known to God. Guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus.
So you could argue based on that scripture that thanksgiving gives your prayer more pop, that you're thankful.
You know, I wrote here, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln both gave proclamations about the day of Thanksgiving. And one of the things that Abraham Lincoln said was, we are prone to forget the source from which they come, talking about the blessings that we have. And that is so true. You know, when I think about it, it's someone that is coming from a third world country, that's lived in squalor, and been in a awful condition, you know, in poverty or whatever. They move to America. It's almost as if they appreciate more the things we have here in the United States than the citizens that live here and were reared here and grew up in this society. We tend to take those things for granted, you know, because we don't realize the contrast, and they do, coming from another country.
I've noticed that foreigners who've been naturalized, they go through the process of becoming American citizens, but naturalized, often are prouder of American history and are more patriotic than many people born here. Just like you said, Stan.
Yeah. They want to be a part of this great, you know, experiment called the United States or America. You know, it's a dream of people to come here. And then on the other hand, we have people here that want to destroy it and tear it down and do away with it because they think it's something evil. It's hard to imagine. And, you know, even I noticed that some of these people that they interview that have moved to the United States, became citizens, are even greater defenders of America because they say, who would want to ever tear down such a glorious place? You know, this freedom that you have here. Why do you have people that want to destroy this? It's amazing to them that anyone would have that attitude towards our country. But here we are.
You know, when the whole COVID thing hit and they were shutting down businesses, there was a woman in Holland, Michigan. I forget her name, but she was Polish. She was from Poland, and she refused to shut it down.
Yeah.
And the governor, what do they call her up there? Adolf Whitmer, I think they call her, up in Michigan. She went after that woman just as nasty as she could be, but the woman fought and fought. She ended up getting closed down. I think she might have even went to jail for a short period of time. But she just couldn't believe that in this country, what she escaped in her day, because she was an older woman, ended up happening here. And you're right. That's the same attitude she had about the whole thing.
I wanted to make another point too, right there where we read in Philippians. It uses the word supplication. You know, we read through that word a lot in Scripture, and that word really, I think it came from a Latin word, but it actually means to beg in essence, but probably better rendered, plead humbly. And I think you have to have humility when you thank somebody or thank God for something. You can't be proud, and because when there's a sort of a reservation that you have when you are thankful. You back away from pride and you sort of humble yourself in order to thank somebody for something that they've done for you, especially in times when you in great need, when you need something desperately and somebody's helped you out. It is very humbling.
Yes.
So true. So true. Let's read Colossians 2:7, please, Ken.
rooted and built up in him and established in the faith as you have been taught, abounding in it with thanksgiving.
And I think Paul is telling people, be thankful for what you do have. Whatever it is, there are people who would like to have what you've got, you just don't know it yet. And it leads to observation law number 3. Happy, contented people are mature and grateful. So if you learn to be thankful, it'll help you be contented. And contented or contentment is good for everybody.
I like to use the example. There's a radio program. I don't know if you guys hear it often. It's this guy's name is Dave Ramsey. I think he had a television show as well. And he was a money, he teaches people how to get out of debt. And he was very wealthy at one time, on top of the world, and then he lost it all. He tells a funny story about this old car, I can't remember what it was, some expensive car that, was using 2 or 3 quarts of oil. And he was still trying to drive it and hang on to this facade of being rich, But now when people call in this program and they ask him, how you doing, Dave? He says, better than I deserve. And I like that. I like that answer. I like the way he puts that because, he went all the way to the bottom. He lost it all, and then he came back. But the second time, he gained wealth back, but this time he was much more appreciative of what God had to do in his life. And you could tell it in his demeanor and everything. So, lust for things brings about a certain anxiety. When people are lusting after more and more things, they're continually worried about how they're going to get them and pay for them. And contentment is the opposite of that. It's peace of mind, of realizing, hey, I'm just going to be happy with what I have, and good things will come along. God will give me and bless me with things later on as I can handle them. And I'm just going to be happy and thankful for the wonderful blessings he's given me and the air I have in my lungs and the roof over my head, and good things will come eventually if God wills it. And that's a great place to be. It's a very peaceful frame of mind.
Yeah, well, that's well said, Barry. That's how we should strive for. Colossians 4:2.
Continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving.
So whatever we do, we want to keep that Thanksgiving going. Now I want to switch subjects, but not really. One of the things you see in the Old Testament, we won't look at all the scriptures because there are a bunch of them, where God tells Moses, and he tells the people, you've got to teach the next generation to be thankful for the blessings God has given us. And he talks about leading them out of the iron furnace of Egypt, but other things too, a bunch of things. And he focuses on teach the next generation. And I can see why, one, that would make them happier if they learn to appreciate what they got. But I can see the real importance of it now. Can't you sense it, what's going on right now?
Yes.
Certainly can. They say it only takes 1 or 2 generations to completely be away from God. It only takes 1 generation if somebody's determined to be rebellious. But it's so important that not only do they teach God's laws, that was the instructions to their children, but how they acquired God's laws and how God rescued them and saved their whole nation. All of that history was important to be transferred to their children so they would know why they do the things that they do.
Let's just read one of the scriptures. But in the article, which you can get on area4.com, AICG area4.com, all the articles are listed. But it says, Deuteronomy 26:5-10. That's just one of the first big longer explanations. But let's look at Deuteronomy 6:7, please, Ken.
All right. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up.
Would you also read Deuteronomy 11, the same topic?
You shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up.
Now, that's what Israel did some of the time, and obviously, to the extent they did it, they were blessed. But what are we teaching our children today? And I'm giving an opinion, but I've heard a lot of people say the same thing. Because of CRT theory, we're teaching our kids to hate their own country, hate their own heritage, in some cases even hate themselves, and just look down on their own parents. And that's true both in America and Britain.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing what I think, social media has a lot to do with that too, because, we've lost the social media has brought about this tremendous independence for young people. They don't need parents, or they don't need God or God's laws, because they can get it all right there on their phone, their smart device, or whatever it is. They can look up the answers, and they've lost this ability, or I should say lost, but they're losing this ability to communicate. Instead of families sitting around the dinner table talking about their day and the problems and working things out, it's very much more introspective and withdrawn from society, and their information is being given to them by social media, which we know is corrupt, can be corrupted as well. But in addition to that, you have the breakdown of the family unit too, that contributes to that, that effective, that ineffective way of passing these important principles on to their children.
I heard this after I'd written the article. I mean, I put things in there about tech being a problem and social media, but they're now claiming that a large chunk of the people, I think it's 18 to 29 or something like that, get their news from TikTok, which is run by the Communist Chinese Party.
Yep.
And they did a survey of young people who view a lot of TikTok. 75% of them fully support the PLO, and they blame America. And they're including, I assume, supporting the justifying their slaughtering of people.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You have to imagine, I was just watching the news where they're, walking through New York, several thousand of them are with their signs protesting, and it's unimaginable that they didn't realize what they did to Israel and the people there. And there is a fervent hate for Israel, and our children are being taught that. I don't even think they understand why they have this hatred. It's a collective hate, and you have to be a part of this, and that's our party line, and they don't have any real reasons why they hate Israel.
And that mob mentality is dangerous. I heard a story on the radio, and it was a famous college campus. It might have been NYU, but it's some famous school. You'd know it if I had written it down, but one of the major ones. There was a Jewish student who had all the Hasidic garb, the big black hat and the beard and the curly hair and the tassels. He was being chased around campus by a mob. Unbelievable, running for his life. And when the campus security didn't save him, students didn't step in. I mean, it was the guy who saw it was Jewish, but they didn't know he was Jewish. He was shocked at what he saw. I thought, wow. And this just happened a few days ago. And this is not, in some Muslim country. This is in a leading American university.
Wow, unbelievable.
I think it was Ivy League, but I won't guarantee it. That it was Ivy, but still one of the major universities.
Well, there certainly is a lack of being thankful for the country we have and the prosperity and the blessings that we've been given. They don't even consider them blessings. They think that we acquired this or took this prosperity from someone else, and so we don't really deserve it. And when you look at it from that angle, then you know they have this hostility that we somehow need to be. It needs to be taken away from us now, and that's certainly not biblical at all. What God has blessed us with here in this country.
You know, it's ridiculous. You could take other countries in the hemisphere. I won't name them, but they're in the same hemisphere. Had obviously their background a little bit different, but their wealth compared to America's wealth is like night and day.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like I realize you're going to say, oh, there's different bad leaders and all that they had, we didn't have, but still. So to say that wealth comes from industrious people making the most of the assets, it's not from the assets by themselves. And somehow, but the part about, I call it twisted history. They take CRT, and the communists came up with this, I believe, in the 60s in academia, and they've been developing it. They simplify history into good guy, bad guy. It's oppressor, oppressed. Colonists versus colonizers versus colony. Now you're going to say, can you oversimplify the history of the world in good guy, bad guy? It's stupid. It's almost like, I'm giving an example. I was watching, this is way back when my grandkids were younger, and for some reason, when I watched some stupid cartoon, and I watched them for a few minutes, and the bad guy was a rich guy, maybe he was in the oil business or something. All he wanted to do was destroy the planet, poison the planet, and chuckle. And I'm thinking, well, one, that's illogical. Because even if you were the richest guy on the planet, if you poison the planet, where are you and your children going to live?
Exactly.
I mean, nobody wants to poison the planet. Now, some may have more concern for clean air and clean water than others, but nobody wants. But it was totally simplistic. But for a little second, third, and fourth graders, it probably worked perfectly. I turned it off because I said, this is stupid. But that's the kind of stuff they've been pushing on our kids for years.
They've been
Well,
pushing.
go ahead, Ken.
I was just going to say the colonizer thing is another ridiculous thing they push, and they've got that attitude towards everything they look at. They look at is, like you said, one is oppressor and one's being oppressed. But every planet on the face of the earth, or every planet, every country on the face of the earth has at one point in time been occupied by a different people than that's there now. Are they going to give back France to the Visigoths? I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. And when you confront them with it, they have nothing to say. Just that America's bad because we took this country from the Indians. Well, there was people here before the Indians, and they were fighting each other for land the whole time before we got here. So guess what?
Oh, by the way, I was in ROTC. We studied all of America's wars, including major Indian wars. And something that I didn't realize, and then the teacher explained it, he said, in every one of America's Indian wars, there were some Indian tribes on America's side. Because the Indians were very divided, and they got a better deal. But this idea that the Indians are gone, actually, there are a lot more Indians now than there were when the colonists first got here. They have Indian reservations all over the place, but a lot of them, they have blended in with the general public. I could say more, but I want to get off on a side topic. But also on that colonizer thing, the way they twist the theory, if you were the oppressed or you were a colony and a colonizer took over, any violence you do against them is justified.
Yep.
You can see how they can get away with letting Hamas butcher, bake kids in an oven, chop off babies' heads, and it's okay. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And just for the record, Islam also did the same thing. I realize Islam started in the 7th century in Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, and through force, they eventually took over the whole Arabian Peninsula and expanded out. In the next 6 to 7 centuries, they dominated a good part of the world by force, by the way. It wasn't like everybody volunteered. It's either, convert or anyway. But they took over much of Spain and were moving into southern France until Mardel. What is his name? Charles Mardel. I haven't written down something. Charles Mardel. The Hammer. What a great name for a general. The Hammer beat them in France and drove them out. And then, as you probably know, in 1492, the big news in Spain wasn't Christopher Columbus. He was a sideshow. That's when they defeated the last enclave of Islam and drove them out of Spain. And also they had a big defeat in Vienna. But if the Ottoman Empire, well, anyway, a whole bunch of things would have turned bad if they had won. And you can go to Genghis Khan, and I'm probably going to forget a few others, who swept, and the Mongols who swept over, pretty much from Korea to deep inside Europe, they dominated. And it was violent domination. It's not like we all joined. And that's just what human behavior has been. I could mention the Zulu kingdom that, actually, they even defeated a big British army. But my only point is, conquest is part of human history. I'm not trying to sanitize it. And most of all, America was a colony. You kind of see how silly this stuff is.
I'm glad you brought up those points in history, because that was a point I was going to make. If we don't teach our children history about these combatants and the stakes that were there during some of these wars that we had in defending freedom and democracy, and why we were having to go out and defend these, our democratic way of life, what the outcome could have been would look a lot different than it looks right now. And you wouldn't be able to be marching through the street demonstrating today had we not suppressed that dictatorial type of government that was trying to take over, major parts of Europe, and eventually would have been the United States.
Yeah. Ken, would you read 59:14? I want to take this scripture and go off in a history direction again.
All right. Justice is turned back and righteousness stands afar off, for truth is fallen in the street and equity cannot enter.
There's a lot of injustice out there. Liberty's not blind, but truth fallen in the streets. You realize that much of what goes on in public schools, especially, is not truth. I used to say to my class, I'd have about 60, 70 students in the class, and I'd ask them something like, do you know why George Washington felt quite prepared and ready to attack the Hessians and the British on Christmas? And we get 1 or 2 students raise their hand. Christmas was outlawed in the American colonies back then. The Americans didn't keep it. They thought it was too sinful. And obviously he caught them drunk and hangover, and actually it worked out even better than you might realize. It was crucial because they had been losing because the British had all the army equipment and Washington didn't. And of course he got a lot of equipment and artillery when he caught them off guard. But then he moved into Trenton and what I call southern New Jersey, and just hundreds of Americans. Almost all Americans had rifles in those days. That's just the way it was. 15,000, you want to call them regular militias, all of a sudden said, hey, maybe we can win this thing. And they joined. That and they drove the British out of most of New Jersey into the safety of New York in their big fleet. And then all of a sudden it was game on. Before that, it looked like it was going to be an easy sweep for the British. But no, you'd have one or two or three students who knew about Christmas being illegal. And guess what kind of school they had attended? Private school. None of the public school kids had any idea.
You know what? One of the biggest successes, I guess, if you're on their side, the Marxists have had is perverting our history. They have completely destroyed and perverted the history in the schools, and these kids have no idea what really happened in our past.
I would argue that I'm speaking relatively. In other words, no country comes across as a simplifying history to good guys, bad guys is stupid. It's idiotic, it's unacademic, and obviously it's inaccurate. Be like if I were a crooked salesman and I would tell all my clients, look, you got two choices. You can be the smart customer who recognizes what a great opportunity you have and you'll take it, or you can be the slow one who's going to let the great opportunity pass you by and you're going to be so sorry. Now, which one are you? Well, that's what they've done with education. Either good guys or bad guys. Do you realize the history of the world is much too complex for that?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Because every nation makes mistakes too. You know, our country's made mistakes in our history, and we got to take the good with the bad. But by and large, we've had a democratic system that we tried to defend and tried to promote and tried to teach the generations from our inception. This is unbelievable what's happening now, and to think that this generation or the last generation and this generation for that matter, we're a generation away from completely destroying everything we ever knew about democracy. I mean, when we shred the Constitution, it's over with. You know, what do we do then? How long will it be before we get rid of the idea of giving thanks to God for anything? I mean, that's the point of this study tonight. Was Thanksgiving, and how long will it be before Thanksgiving has become a mockery in the United States? We don't need to be thankful for anything. That's the attitude.
Just a bump between Halloween and Black Friday, right? In the shopping. It's almost that bad in a lot of places now, But I'm saying relatively speaking, because nobody is no one can be totally, everything's good guy, and the other things, nothing's that simplistic. But relatively speaking, America and Britain have had, I would say, the most successful and the best record, best history on the planet. Not just success, but, America was the first country of any size to give religious freedom. You read what went on in Europe and a lot of other countries, you'll see how important that is. And really, you could make an argument that America, because we've had freedom and God's blessings with natural resources. I want to take God out of the picture. Because we were thankful, like the Pilgrims were thankful, they got blessed, that America has led the way in all kinds of opportunities, been opportunity rich compared to most of the rest of the world. I once saw a list of about 200 of the best innovations in the last 150 years. Almost every one was started in America. You'd be amazed. Yeah. Air conditioning, the airplanes, network radio, movie industry, the internet. You'd be shocked when you see the list. You go, wow, almost all of them were started here.
Yep.
But they'll drag out these old documents that go back centuries and millennia, and they'll claim that some, Arab country, 4 centuries ago, 4 4 millennia ago created or came up with some idea of mathematical solution, and that's the reason that we have the internet now.
Oh, you know what they
We'll
did?
give the United
You know,
States credit.
do you know what the Arabs were responsible for in math? The concept of zero. I'm dead serious. I am serious as a heart attack. So they're basically responsible for nothing. The concept of zero is what they were, their fame to claim is.
I'm not saying that they didn't have some knowledge or understanding, but when you look at, like Dr. Rick said, the innovations in our technology and science, engineering, space age, I mean, it's phenomenal compared to you take, if you were to take a string and go from, from the time of Adam till now, United States would be on the very end of that string, a very small dot, and every technology that we have would be included in that, and it's a vast majority. I can't remember where I was reading about the natural resources we had here in the United States, like tin and copper and lumber and coal, and of course now natural gas and oil. At one time we had, I can't remember the statistics. It was like 60 or 70% of the copper for the whole world was coming out of the United States. That's just unbelievable. These copper mines, silver mines, and of course, gold mines as well that were extant here in the United States, and the farming industry, the bread, the bread basket as they called it, the corn belt, just was phenomenal. The country that we were given that were so rich in natural resources, and the blessings that were on top of that in technology and advancement is you just can't just sweep it away with a broad brush. You just can't.
By the way, Britain first, and then America came on even gangbusters later with the best agricultural production techniques. And for much of America's history, you know what the biggest agricultural problem America had? Too much.
Yeah.
I know you're going to laugh at that. Too much corn, too much wheat. And the farmers said, look, and then you're driving the price down. Now, how many countries in the world, many of them have food problems, shortages?
Had that problem.
We love that. Too much, but that's actually been true in America.
Yep. I want to say one thing, preface what I said earlier. The Arab people up until the 6th century had all kinds of inventions and were quite a society. But until the 6th century, until they adopted Islam, they started going backwards in development, and everything. Everything stopped. Like everybody it's like the Amish, they stopped in like what the 1500s or 1600s. They didn't proceed forward after that. Same thing happened to the Arab people when they adopted that religion. Just stopped.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
I've heard that they helped develop algebra, but I know one thing. You get the feeling that even with the algebra, and they, and maybe some of the great caliphates had great libraries that saved some literature that would have otherwise died in the Dark Ages. But you can see how caste systems and religious systems, both Europe, India, and the Middle East, have held those countries back from progress.
Well, and we're not even including the fact that these nations overtook and captured other nations and countries and brought back with them. Is it possible that some of these nations took hostage some of the ancient Israelites that contained Jewish people that were brilliant, that went back to places, like ancient Egypt and even into the Arab nations? They were a part of Abraham's progeny, but they could have had some of these people that were from the nation of Israel that were geniuses that were able to calculate, and they even in ancient Egypt, they understood that the earth was not flat because of the way they could measure the shadows on these big tall buildings and things that they would put up from one place in Egypt to another. They understood that the shadow links were different at the same time, and they knew that there was a curvature of the earth. So they knew the earth was round, and that's, somebody had that ingenuity and that ability. So I'm not undermining the fact that they didn't have any ingenuity at all, but
Yeah, we
certainly
don't
not
put
to the
them
extent
down.
that we have here in the United States.
I mean, we have, and whether it might seem like a small thing, but Britain and America, I'm not saying perfectly, but relative to most places in the world, we were able to use the Jewish genius to add to America's versatile labor force, resources, etc., help make us more productive.
Yeah.
Germany would have been a lot closer to getting the A-bomb if they had kept Einstein around.
Yeah.
He's a
Bad
German
part.
Jew because he got run out of the country, but 1938, I believe. But you know the point I'm making. It wasn't perfect, because you're going to say, I know there are instances of bad things happening in America, but you know what I mean. We integrated the talents of people all over the world in a free, not that it's a big deal, but just a story you might find interesting. Frederick Douglass was born a slave, but he died a millionaire. Now, I realize he was super gifted and talented. Most people aren't going to be able to do that. But where else would he have had a chance to do that?
Oh,
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course, they claim he's the one that first suggested to Lincoln freeing the slaves as a political advice. But you maybe can debate that about who said what first. But the point is, America has been full of opportunities for all kinds of people. And a lot of times you just don't hear about it. They put the focus on a negative twist on American history.
And you know what? They want to take away that ability for people to do what he was able to do. They want to take away equality and replace it with equity, which is equality of outcome, which means you don't get to succeed because we're going to take from you and give to this other person to make sure you're both equally poor and miserable, which is exactly what you get when you get socialism.
Yep.
Equality of misery.
Speaking of socialism, this may be a good time to mention it. I was going to bring it up later, but when the colonists started in, was it 1620, when they arrived at Plymouth Rock, they had a communal or communist socialist system. They shared everything together. Well, what happened was, I'm going to get the same thing whether they work hard or not. They didn't work hard. They almost starved to death.
Yep.
Well, Bradford switched it. Everybody got private property, a private plot of land, and they had to, they got to sell their profits, for profit and eat what they grew. And all of a sudden they became super productive, and other Puritans saw their success. And of course, the rest is history.
Do you know why they did that at the beginning and went with the socialist? Do you remember why? The people, the money backers in England and Europe forced it into the charter in order for them to give them the money to do that. They wanted the Plymouth Pilgrims to be kind of a guinea pig for this socialist ideal they had in Europe. These people with all the money that were backing them. Well, like you said, as soon as they figured out, go ahead.
They were still trying to control
They
it.
were. And yes, Bradford said, to heck with this. We're all going to starve to death when all the young, healthy guys weren't doing anything because they're like, why bother?
And I used to ask students, I said, well, when they kicked socialism and went to capitalism, the colony became a financial success. And by the way, if you go back to colonial days, even when the American Revolution came, 1776, most of the colonists in America had higher living standards than the people in Europe. So it wasn't a revolt of the starving peasants. It was more somewhat of a middle class, we don't like being taxed without asking about it kind of thing. It wasn't they were starving. In other words, even as a colony, they were very successful. But I'd ask students, how many of you knew that they rejected socialism and went to capitalism? there'd be one or two hands. And guess what kind of schools they were from?
Private schools.
The public school students knew nothing about nothing.
They didn't teach us that back in the 70s, 80s.
Nope,
Didn't teach
they
us.
didn't.
They told us that the colonies would have died if it wasn't for the Indians showing them how to plant corn. Except they brought corn with them because they had it in Europe. They just it was the lame soil. They were having trouble getting enough nourishment out of the soil, and the Indians told them to put a fish in it. That was their big contribution. The Pilgrims fed the Indians because they were starving. They twisted the whole thing backwards. If you read William Bradford's book, you'll learn the truth.
And what's scary is since a lot of kids learn from their smartphones and devices, I'm listening to what I hear people say on the radio. They say they've taught AI to lie to certain people about certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And that would make a great science fiction book if you just think about it. But the point is, you can't trust AI or social media, not be biased algorithms loaded against the truth.
They have to do that.
Go ahead.
They have to do that. Why are they so afraid of it, and why are they having all these I think they've signed some bill about some AI safe AI thing. They're afraid that if you just turn AI loose and don't give it any information and let it go, it will disprove all their narratives. If you think about it, if the truth is allowed to flow freely without being intervened on behalf of the people with the narrative out there, it's just going to say, this isn't right, this ain't right, and you'll get the truth. But they've got to backload it. That's the scary part of AI, because when they load it with their narrative, that's when bad things can happen.
Yeah, wouldn't it be something that AI actually told the truth about, the leftist agenda and just blurted it out there, like never before? That has to be a great fear of that, of that propagandist, that it would be revealed the things behind the closed doors that are the negotiations that are being made could be made public.
Absolutely.
Brainwashing our kids. Would you read Psalm 67, please, Ken?
Yep. Let the people praise you, O God. Let all the people thank you. Let the people give thanks to you, O God. Let all the people praise you. The earth shall yield its increase, and God, our own God, shall bless us.
So now let's talk about a little bit more about the first Thanksgiving. I know we're running out of time.
And I don't think they care.
First Thanksgiving, and what I've read, I got a book called 1491, and he goes through what happened to all the various Indian nations prior to the Europeans getting here. And the one principle he sees is they were fighting and destroying each other and going through some horrible civil wars. So when the Spanish and Portuguese got there, they were ripe for the taking. And the funny thing is, it happened at Plymouth Rock too. According to the book and some others I read, Massasoit, the chief of the Indian tribes that were on that part of Plymouth Rock, that part of Massachusetts, they saw the ship unloading the Pilgrims. They could have, tried an attack then, but he thought about it, and he saw them unloading guns and I think a few cannons. And they had experienced guns from the fishermen that, came aboard for a few days and left. So they knew about guns. And the Iroquois League, because they had died off a lot of diseases, and their numbers were down, the Iroquois League was pushing them from the west. And they felt threatened. He says, well, these colonists will help us. Mention the guns too, but I think he saw that. And so they made an alliance with the English settlers. And you could argue they helped each other. The English used tools and what we would call modern agriculture of that day, 1620, to help the Indians. And the Indians gave them information about where to fish and hunt and certain things about the local forest that would be useful to them.
Soil.
But then the biggest thing happened was just when they were just getting there, all of a sudden walks in a translator, Squanto. And the thing about Squanto, there were only 2 men in the entire planet who could speak the Wampanoag language. I'm probably mispronouncing that, in English. One could just barely do it. But Squanto could speak English wonderfully. He had, well, his story is a long story between Spanish fishermen picked him up. He was sold in slavery to England, lived in London for a while. Some Christians got him his freedom. He converted to Christianity, took an English boat back to his home, and he thought he's coming into his home village, but it was gone, and the English were there. And they were shocked. He can speak English, like King James English from London. They got a translator who was a Christian just when they needed it. Now you talk about a blessing from God.
Yep. It was a miracle.
It's a miracle. What a blessing. And he helped negotiate the treaty, and the 2 groups worked together, and they, I think it's 2nd or 3rd year, they had such good crops and things were going so well that the governor said, let's have a 3-day Thank God festival, which they claim they shaped it after biblical thankful festivals. I mean, that's what the Pilgrims said. And so both groups helped each other. And for over half a century, they had peaceful coexistence.
Yay.
And because of their numbers and guns, the Iroquois were held at bay. You know, if you want to know that part of the story.
Yay. Very good.
And you know, I'll bet you 99% of the kids today don't know anything about that kind of history or story.
Right.
And even if you were to argue that maybe in the beginning, because the Indians knew, especially fishing, because they were on the coast, and that would be very helpful in the food supply all year long, the Indians might have been very helpful to them. But over the years, because of technology, the English would be very helpful to the Indians.
Yes. Very good.
And for anybody that says, well, it's genocide, you know, there are movies, I saw one, they make the Pilgrims out as villains.
Oh, yeah.
And they laid the foundation and got the start to the greatest nation on the planet. I mean, you might knock their belt buckles and their little funny hats and their blunderbuster guns, but they did lay a foundation for the greatest nation in the world.
Yep.
And you can't, and they will not give God the credit for blessing us with that start and with the moving here to this country, beginning that process.
And we could argue that the fact that the Pilgrims decided with the Indians, we should have a festival thanking God for our, successfully surviving the tough New England winters, because they thought they'd land much further south. Anyway, it's another story. And doing so well, because they thanked God, God blessed them greatly.
Yeah, we just read that there in Psalms where it says if we'll be thankful, God will continue to bless us as a result of us giving thanks to him for it. Jesus gave thanks too. He gave thanks for the food provision that he had. He gave thanks for the food before he fed the 4,000 and the 5,000. He gave thanks to God before he raised Lazarus. He gave thanks to God to his disciples, who he said was going to be given the truth, and they would be given understanding when other people wouldn't have understanding. So they probably read those episodes where Jesus gave thanks and realized that there was a real need, of course, with the Psalms and David as well, that there is a time and a place that we should really give God thanks for the blessings that he has given us.
Yes.
And the more we thank him, the more future blessings we're likely to get.
Absolutely.
like the Pilgrims. And if you look at America, I have this one map, I don't have it anymore, but it listed all the territories America got in the year in which they got them, and they're all dotted out. And it's an unbelievable explosion of success. And I'm not saying, there weren't good guys who did things to help them succeed, but you can't deny God's hand behind it, can you?
It was just, like you said, you really have to look and read history to see the phenomenal wealth and the resources that we had here. It just is unbelievable what look at, for an example, the buffalo that existed in the United States. It was like a sustenance for people traveling west across the United States that is practically gone now, but there were just millions upon millions of those here wild, and it was like a food source that allowed them to make their way west and sustain them. It almost seems as though that was there for that purpose.
The amazing,
I never thought of it that way.
the speed at which the country was born and progressed was just unheard of. I mean, we took this huge chunk of land and expanded it so fast and developed it so fast with railways, and it's just unbelievable how quickly we came from a small little, 13 colonies into running everything, basically, and supplying the world with food and energy and you name it.
I would argue that if you look at history in one way, from George Washington's first presidency, 1892, to 1892, America went from struggling little colonies to maybe the world's #1 economy and a superpower. I realize it took a few more years for the Spanish-American War. A few things didn't reach that, but they were primed for it. In just a little over a century, they went from that to that. And that kind of speed is unheard of. God blessed America because America, thank God, and maybe because of Abraham and some blessings as well. And also, the Puritans were very, very biblical. We might argue on a few of their doctrines, but you read their material and their manifesto, they were very Bible-oriented.
Were you going to mention George Washington and his proclamation? I don't know if you were going to bring that up or not.
Yeah, I was going to mention Washington and Lincoln at a time when the country was at what we call crucial moments in history. Both of them asked for prayer on Thanksgiving. And both those prayers were answered. Obviously, we won the American Revolution and won the Civil War. So you could argue that both prayers were answered on those Thanksgiving. I think in Lincoln's was it 1863 and Washington was it
1789.
I'm going to get the date. When was it Washington?
1789.
1789. Yeah.
And Lincoln was
And
1863.
I think they made the proclamation on exactly the same day. I think Abraham Lincoln followed George Washington's example and did it exactly on the same day as well.
And America did have problems with the foundation documents before they got our current Constitution. And I can't remember all the squabbling over it, but you have to say that both presidents got good answers for their prayers. And anyway, and we probably should say more about Washington and Lincoln both.
And it wasn't a national holiday until Lincoln actually proclaimed it a national holiday.
Right.
Yeah, and if I would encourage anybody to go back and read Lincoln's speech on
Both of them were
Thanksgiving.
good.
Excellent. I may read part of it tomorrow.
Oh, go ahead.
The academia has been dumping on Lincoln and Washington. And if you were to look at it logically, America was blessed, especially during the American Revolution, to have so many high quality men at one place at one time. And then Lincoln at a crucial moment, and a few good people will be with him. That's a real blessing that people, you say, Lincoln didn't have the same racial perspective people have today. So what? he came out of the world he came out of, but he did what needed to be done. And that's the same with Washington. So what? Washington did what needed to be done. I could actually say a lot of good things about Washington, but we get off the topic here. But the point is, academia has been dumping on those men. And you look at the world at that time in history, most countries didn't have a Washington and didn't have a Lincoln. And their countries, well, you look at them, Brazil, I could rattle them off, France, and you compare them with America the same time period.
Both of those proclamations, too, were on the heels of a war, and both of those presidents was beseeching God to heal their nation and to unite the people and to overcome the differences that we had. I mean, it was like a unifying proclamation, as well as numerous references to God as being the provider and the one that gave us these many blessings that we should be extremely thankful for. They were, as I said, they were unifying. They weren't furthering the division, but they were trying to unify, especially Lincoln in his address, in his proclamation, to try to heal the wounds that had happened in their country, in our country. And that's what struck me as something that was very profound.
A lot of times people don't appreciate greatly. They didn't appreciate Lincoln until he was assassinated. Sometimes it takes that, and then they realize, wow, what a great man we had, and we didn't appreciate him. Mm-hmm. Much of the press did not like Lincoln. This lanky backwoods barrister, well, you've probably seen some of those old political cartoons from the 1860s.
Yeah. Our country may have an opportunity to feel that same way about God if he backs out his blessings from our country because of our rebellion and our, rejection of him. If he were to remove the blessings that we have here in our country, we would see a stark difference between what we've all enjoyed and what our country could be like without God's protection and his blessing. And we may see that contrast at some time in the future.
I want to ask, go ahead, Ken.
I was going to say, we may be seeing that now in the inner cities. I mean,
True.
It's pretty rough. I wouldn't want to go in any of them for any reason. I just want to stay out of them.
What bothered me, someone who was in charge of a synagogue in Detroit was shot and killed. And they're claiming that's just a random crime, not a hate crime. It bothers me. Both the press and the legal system don't want to face what's going on.
Yeah, they caught somebody. What they won't release their name was the last thing I heard.
Like the lady that shot up the Christian school in Nashville, they basically hid her manifesto because they want to lie to the American people about why it happened. It wasn't about guns. It was about hatred and radical. Anyway, the point is that we're living in a world full of lies. And I know we're out of time, but I want to ask one more question before we leave. We won't be here next weekend. We'll be enjoying Thanksgiving with the grandkids. And I'll be trying to correct their misunderstandings.
Let me know how that goes.
Yeah, it's getting harder as they get older, believe me. And they're smarter. And anyway, can we really get kids today to appreciate America? That's the question. Because public schools have been pushing them in the opposite direction.
I don't know. Once if they've gone through public school, they're almost, unless they've got a strong home, they're almost lost. It's hard to reach those people,
I think one of the biggest ways that we could accomplish that is through parental example. Parental example goes a long way. You hear success stories of people that, they remember their dad pushing them to go the extra mile or to be exemplary in their attitude and their performance and their practice. And they attributed their parents, in a lot of cases where they were successful because the example their parents set. If our country had parents that were setting example of patriotism and the idea that God was the blessings, was the provider of the blessings we have. I think you could follow that example that's given in the Bible to pass that attitude right on to the next generation, the love for God and the love for country and appreciation and thanksgiving that we owe him.
Yeah, well said. And all we can do is tell them what truth we do understand. That Thanksgiving was both the Indians and the English Puritans, the Pilgrims helped each other, and they all prospered. Well, eventually things fall apart, but that's another piece of history as those things kind of go. But I still think one of the worst things is to try to simplify history to the good guys and the bad guys. And America's on the, if you succeed, that means you're automatically a bad guy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's Marxism.
Yep. It's crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. And by the way, we do plan to do Romans 14 after Thanksgiving. And then we'll do something on the Laodiceans shortly after that. So we haven't forgotten those topics. I just thought we should look at how Thanksgiving is being not given its due.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to cover before we sign off? Nope. All right, then. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your Sabbath. Have a most wonderful Thanksgiving this coming Thursday. Get the turkey down and the tryptophan going and get a nice nap in. And we'll see you next week. And good night, everybody.
Good night.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.